Well, it is 7 o'clock, so we can go ahead and probably officially kick things off here. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is recorded, so we'll also welcome those who are watching this at a later date. This is going to be the first of, I believe, 5 or 6 webinars here that we're going to do, which is going to be every Thursday from 7 to 8 o'clock. And we're going to have Dale kick us off here with a presentation on expanding your mind and your profit and a bunch of other things. So we're excited to learn from him. Just a little bit about Dale. He grew up on a diversified farm near Colony, Kansas, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive southwest of Kansas City. He attended Kansas State University and got his bachelor's degree in secondary science education, as well as a bachelor's and a master's degree in agronomy. He's worked for several companies as an agronomist throughout his life. And prior to that, he also taught agronomy at Cloud County Community College. He is an author in his spare time and currently has 2 books published, The Drought Resilient Farm and Managing Pasture, as well as a 3rd book that he's working on, soil restoration, that we are all really looking forward to reading. So with that, Dale, let me let you go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
If you've got PowerPoint ready to go, and we'll just kind of let you kick off. I will mention to anybody that is watching, you guys are on mute, but if you want to go ahead and type any questions that you have in the chat bar, we might possibly have time to get to those here right around about 7:45. If not, Dale has a pretty packed presentation here of good information, so I don't want to cut him short. So if he ends up going long till about 8 o'clock, what we'll do is collect all those questions, and you can email them to Dale@greencoverseed.com, and he will get back to all of you guys here with any questions that you have. So with that, Dale, I will pass it over to you.
Okay. Well, hopefully by the end of this presentation, all of your brains look like the brain of the person in front of you here. We're at a junction in time where a lot of people are seriously very worried. If you're in agriculture, this is one of the bleakest times ever in agriculture. You know, in my half century plus on this planet, I can't remember, maybe the mid 80s when people were this depressed in agriculture. And so I think we'll start by looking at essentially the profit equation. You know, profit is your production times the price you receive for that production minus your expenses. Now, of these, which can we control? Can we control our production? Yeah, certainly we can. There are things we do that we manage to improve our production. And we control the price we receive for our product. Yeah, you can do some things like direct marketing, and I would encourage you to explore as many of those. But if you're selling on the commodity market, not that much you can do about the price you receive. What about expenses? What are your expenses and what can you do about them? Some expenses are probably necessary. And then I will talk about things that I consider to be completely unnecessary expenses. And the trick is, how do you eliminate expenses without reducing production? Obviously, most of our expenses are incurred with the idea that we're going to get increased production out of those. So one thing I know for certain, which is not very many things, but one thing I do know for certain is that if you are not making money, you need to change. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what I'm doing works just fine if we could just get some decent prices. Well, that might be true. But if your business plan that you take to the bank is, hey, this all works if we get better prices, good luck to you. Do not build a business based on the assumption that you're going to get better prices. Good times, bad times, either being a very productive operation or very low cost operation, or both, is going to be a lot better than sitting in. I mean, think about it. If you sit in the coffee shop and complain enough about how low prices are, do you really think the Chicago Board of Trade is going to increase those prices? I kind of doubt it. Now, obviously, if we're going to change, that comes with a certain amount of fear. It is human nature to fear change. When someone comes up with a new idea, there is always resistance to that idea. And why is that? It's almost as if someone does something different, there's a certain amount of ostracism that comes with that being different. And I just love this cartoon here because it really does illustrate human nature. You can see the light bulb being led to the gallows surrounded by candles.
Hey, Dale, real quick, I don't think that your PowerPoint is sharing on that screen.
Interesting.
I wasn't sure if you were going off that or if you were just going on
Yeah,
memory.
I was, but well, is that one showing?
Nope. We can still see you. I'm just not seeing your presentation.
Something happened to on your end?
Nope.
Seeing any of my presentation? I've got it up on my screen.
Are you sharing that screen or are you sharing a different screen?
I thought I'm sharing this screen. Are you seeing any of these?
Nope.
Well, that's embarrassing. Is there a little button for me to share that I have to click?
Yep. On the bottom there, right in the middle, it says share screen.
No, it doesn't. Here, hold on. Let me expand it. Not getting the share screen.
Okay.
There we go. Got it. Now let's try.
There you go.
Okay, this would have been a lot better if you could have all seen this at the beginning. But this is what I want all your brains to look at when we're done. And this is the worry, profit, production times, right? Yeah. So anyhow, Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over and again, expecting different results. So rather than be insane, let's do something different so we can get different results, because the results most of us are getting right now in agriculture aren't very satisfactory. This is what I was hoping to show you, the cartoon of the light bulb being led to the gallows. Now, when most of us are presented with a new idea, how often do you hear this? That won't work around here. Why not? It seems like the other guy always has some sort of unfair advantage. He gets more rain. He has less mud. It's like he either gets less rain or more rain. That's his advantage. He has better soil, or if his soil is worse, well, he can do that because he has cheap land. He has a longer growing season, or his winter's less severe, or there's always the other guy who has the idea, always has some unfair advantage. That's why it works there, but it won't work here. Why do we say that? Why do we do that? Why do we restrict our options before we ever explore those options? Think about the ideas that you've automatically rejected before you've ever tried them or even thought them through. And think about who do you get information from? When someone gives you an idea, a suggestion, how well is that idea received? And does it depend on who's giving you the idea? Is it coming from a university professor? Is it a farmer that's halfway across the country that you saw on YouTube? Is it your neighbors? Some people trust their neighbors more than a university professor. Is it someone who is working at the local co-op, the ag retailer, seed salesman, someone trying to sell you something? And then what kind of data convinces you? Do you need replicated research data? Is it your neighbor looking over the fence like Wilson here in the corner? Do you believe your neighbors over replicated research? Do you trust things that you find on Google, Facebook, social media? And are you a crawdad in a bucket? Has anybody ever caught crawdads and put them in a bucket, like for fish bait? I used to catch crawdads all the time when I was a kid. Real interesting phenomenon. If you have one crawdad in a bucket, he will climb right up the sides of a plastic bucket and get out. If, however, you put two crawdads in a bucket or more, as soon as one starts getting a little ways up the side, one of the other crawdads will grab a hold of him and try to climb up his back. And then they both fall to the ground. People are like crawdads in a bucket. If one person gets an idea that's going to get them out of the bottom of the bucket by climbing up the side, all the other crawdads, out of jealousy, will try to pull them back down. How often do you see this? When someone is trying something different, someone's trying something new, is there encouragement? Or do people ridicule them? Do they try to pull them back down? Why do we do that? Maybe it's because if they succeed with their idea, and we did not also try that idea, and we're still stuck here in failure, we feel pretty guilty because we had the same opportunity they did, and we didn't take it. Don't be a crawdad in a bucket. Explore new ideas, and when someone's trying new ideas, be supportive of them. Maybe when you try a new idea, they'll likewise be supportive of you. Another thing I encourage is to focus on principles, not practices. And I've got a picture of a radish here because radishes were one of the original, I guess it was the tillage radish that really made the whole cover crop movement get started. People would go into wheat stubble, they'd plant the radishes, and you get this big old root that would break up the hard pan, and the roots on next year's crop would grow deeper. That was the idea. And some of the people who did it originally had tremendous results. And then so people got excited, and a lot of people planted radishes and then had abysmal failures. You say, well, how come some people were successful and others were not? Well, if you think about it, think, why does the radish improve the drought tolerance of the next crop? Well, of course, it would penetrate the hard pans so the next crop roots deeper. That's a bonus. But the other way of creating drought tolerance is through soil surface armor. By leaving residue and a mulch out there. And we'll talk about this a little more in a bit. But what happened is that in 2011, 2012, the drought years, people had these radishes growing out there in a monoculture radish, only one single species. And they had all this feed out there, and they said, whoa, we're out of feed. Our pastures are dried up. Let's go graze the radishes, which is perfectly acceptable. But they grazed the radishes to the point where they removed all their surface armor. All their soil armor was gone. They eliminated their mulch, and they violated, yes, they planted the cover crop, but when they grazed too much, they removed their armor. They removed their mulch, and they violated one of the principles of creating drought tolerance, and that is, why do we plant a cover crop? Why do we call it a cover crop? Because it creates cover. If you manage your cover crop in a way that you reduce your cover, you undid most of the good that you did in planting the cover crop. It would have been helpful if they had planted some species along with it. One of the other principles is diversity. Plant some other species with it with more persistent residue, and graze in a manner where they left a layer of residue intact on the soil surface. People who did that had fantastic results during those same years. Why did some people have good luck or have good results and others have poor results? The people who understood the principles did well. People who only did the practices did poorly. And I took a group of students during my teaching days to visit a farmer. Took a field trip, visited a farmer. This guy was known for growing 100-bushel wheat crops. I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, that was unheard of. And so we were all excited. We thought we were going to get the magic recipe for growing 100-bushel wheat. And we got there. He set us down. He said, the first thing he said after, introductions, he said, I know you're here looking for the recipe to grow 100-bushel wheat, and I can't give it to you. I'm sitting here, what? That's why we're here. We want the recipe. He said, I can give you one piece of advice. He said, learn the principles that increase wheat yield. Learn how the wheat plant grows. Learn what costs you wheat. Learn how to put inputs in at certain growth stages. Learn when wheat yield components. Become a student of the wheat plant. Learn the principles by which wheat yield is determined. Don't follow a recipe. He said, when I started doing this, my neighbors all wanted the recipe. I told them what I did, and they did exactly what I did the year before. They went out and I said, well, I sprayed fungicide at this stage and I did this. They did those things, and they did it in a year when we had no disease pressure. The next year, I didn't need to apply a fungicide. They spent a fortune on fungicide. It was a dry year, and they didn't need it. They didn't bother to scout their wheat. I told them to scout their wheat. They didn't, because they were focused on practices, magic yield-enhancing practices, rather than the principles. Learn what makes things happen. So, and focus on the why. If something didn't work, there's a reason it didn't work. And that reason is never, well, it just doesn't work around here. Just doesn't work around here is a lazy statement. It means you didn't investigate to learn why something failed. Sometimes you learn more from failure than you can from a success. Success makes us intellectually lazy. Failures give us an excuse to learn. And if you learn from a failure, that can be far more valuable than a success sometimes. Like, for example, I went out 3 years in a row when I first started farming in north central Kansas after having grown up in southeast Kansas. Southeast Kansas, we always spread clover into our brome and fescue pastures. Well, I rented a brome patch, spread clover out there 3 years in a row, had zero results. I thought, well, It just doesn't work around here. Later that summer, I had a horrible grasshopper problem, and so I spread grasshopper bait and wiped out my grasshoppers. And then the next spring, I got to the line where I spread that grasshopper bait. I had clover come up. I didn't even plant clover that year. I didn't seed any seed. It was just all the unsprouted seed from the 3 years prior that came up. Why did I get clover coming up, even though I hadn't spread any that year, where I spread the grasshopper bait? And I went out and investigated, and I found out that where I spread the grasshopper bait, I had no crickets. Where I did spread the grasshopper bait, or where I did not spread the grasshopper bait, it was overwhelmed with crickets. The crickets were going around eating up all the clover seedlings. That's why it didn't work. It wasn't because it was too dry. It wasn't because there was some magic barrier that prevented clover from working, north of this line or west of this line, or it was crickets. So, and I probably would have never found that out if it hadn't been for that grasshopper problem. So figure out the reason something doesn't work and see if you can afford to overcome it. Does it make sense financially? So we're going to focus first of all on production, and then we're going to look at expenses. And we'll talk about the three biggest unnecessary expenses in the cattle, or in the pasture livestock business, I should say. So maximizing plant growth. Plants have 5 growth factors: sunlight, water, soil minerals, oxygen in the soil, and carbon dioxide in the air. And we're going to focus on the first 3. We could spend time on oxygen and carbon dioxide, but as far as management principles, we're going to focus on sunlight, water, and minerals. Now, if you were to ask 100 ranchers which of these 3 is the one that gives them the most worry at night, they're going to tell you it's moisture, it's rainfall. But man, we could sure use a rain. Oh, wish it'd rain. How many of you in the audience are wishing that tonight? Well, I hope that hurricane brings some rain up this way. Well, it sure is dry around here. We could sure use a rain. Well, the picture here is from Al Baida in Saudi Arabia. These folks average 2 inches of rain a year, and it's 120 degrees for daily highs for months on end. This is about as dry an area as you can find on the planet. And I want to show you something here. Okay, first of all, they actually have a problem with floods killing their livestock, because when it rains that 2 inches, you can see the slope they have here. And the only grazing they have is down in the little dry creek valleys where moisture accumulates after a rain. It's rocky soil, so there's no infiltration. When they get a rain, they lose livestock. They have a problem with too much rain and too little rain simultaneously. You know what? The rest of us do too. And I'll show you exactly what I mean later on. The first thing they did, and this was something that was commissioned by the Princess of Saudi Arabia. She got a Harvard professor and a Stanford professor come over and do this. And they were not professors of agriculture, which is probably good, because if you'd brought professors of agriculture over, I would have said, if you ask someone, what do you do here? And it's real simple. You move. Go someplace where there's soil. Go someplace where there's rain. Well, that's not an option. What do you do? What do you have as a resource here? They had rocks. So what they did is they went down the dry streams where the floods can occur, and you can see they made these little rock dams to stop that flow of water, and then they want to divert it out of the streams. So fanning away from the streams on the contour, These little little lines here of rocks, the only resource they have there, these are at the same elevation as the top of the dams. They're actually slightly downhill from the top of those little dams. From the edges of those dams, they make wings that go on the contour out onto the uplands. So when the water comes down that stream, it's channeled out onto the uplands. And this is what it looks like 10 years later. 2 inches of rainfall. Look at that grass. And here it is in the fall. That's the same spot. Same picture that I showed you from years earlier. Isn't that amazing? 2 inches of rainfall. Why do I show you this? What does it have to do with your environment? It just demonstrates what you can do when you stop runoff. I'll show you some other examples from around the world. This is Kalahari Desert. They dug these pits. They're called Zai pits. And you can see the pattern in which the runoff from one pit fills the next pit down slope. And this is what those Zai pits look like after rain. This is I can't even pronounce, Al Jabark, I believe is the name of this place. But look at those terraces designed to stop water runoff. And they grow onions and garlic on these terraces. And that's just solid rock. But look what you can do when you stop the runoff. This is called a Zuni waffle garden. This is found in New Mexico, Arizona, the Zuni Indians down there. Build these pits in the ground and they elevate around it to stop the wind, and they'll plant their plants down in the base in here. You can see when it rains, each of these little basins hold that water. And then they'll use pebbles as a mulch. So the water runs over the pebbles, gets in the soil, but the pebbles, the sunlight hits the pebbles, and instead of hitting the soil that's moist. So it's a way of just retaining moisture. This is another terrace system. This is Ollantaytambo in the Andes Mountains. Again, stop the runoff. And this is some rice terraces in the Philippines. Think, how do you grow rice in the mountains? Again, you stop the runoff. You retain it. Now, you don't need to go to those kinds of extremes in this environment. But there are opportunities to stop runoff. You can see all the little green lines on this screen here. This is from western Kansas. Why are those little green streaks across there? Obviously, that's where the water accumulates after a rain. It runs off the ridges and into those little, what are called primary valleys. This is how most landscapes that have any slope are arranged. You know, we've got these little primary ridges, and water runs off of those, and you can see the little dry streams in between those ridges, and marked by the X. And the X's there are where the shape turns from concave to convex is called the key point. And an Australian named P.A. Yeomans authored a book called Water for Every Farm. Basically was a means of land shaping to stop this runoff and to retain it. And he proposed that you build a little pond at those key points, and then a contour terrace, a little diversion to a pond that sits up on top of the ridge. And you can see from the illustration above, kind of the cutaway view of that landscape, that the pond at the key point is at equal elevation to the pond on the ridge. And then once it's up on the ridge, if you need to, you can put a siphon tube or a little pump into those ponds on top of the ridge, call them saddle ponds, and move water anywhere downhill, which is most of the landscape. So you can have a source of temporary irrigation all over the place. And this has been very, very successful where it's been used. Another means is taking these little seasonal streams and simply putting a small dam or a series of small dams across them to retain water, to let it soak laterally across the landscape. And all you're doing here essentially is what beavers have done in North America for thousands of years. But you don't need to even go to that extreme. If you really want to keep the raindrop where it falls, get the kind of results that we saw over in Saudi Arabia, you don't need to do all these things. You don't need to pile rocks. All you have to do is keep a mulch on the ground. Where can you find a mulch out in the pasture? Well, you can see the effectiveness of a mulch here. All you have to do is, you can see how as you increase the straw rate, the infiltration rate of rainfall goes up. And also, a mulch not only increases the infiltration of rainfall, it also reduces the evaporation of rainfall. Study at Garden City, now this was on irrigated corn at Garden City, but where they had a full coverage over the soil surface, where they left the corn residue or they removed the corn residue, there was a difference in evaporation over the course of a year of 5 acre inches. 5 additional inches. How many of you are sitting out looking at your pasture today saying, man, I wish I had more moisture in my soil? If you don't have enough moisture in your soil, how much of it is attributed to a lack of mulch on your soil? How many of you had a rain event earlier this year where most of it ran off? Would you like to see that moisture still in your soil now? Or you had a rainfall event, and it got soil in and it evaporated away. You retard both runoff and evaporation with a mulch. And the easiest way to have a mulch out in the pasture is simply to graze less. That's very counterintuitive. You actually produce more grazing by grazing less. And I'll explain how that process works, but it really does. It's kind of like when George Brett was a rookie and he was batting under 200 and he was in danger of being sent home, never to play professional baseball again. And his hitting coach, Charlie Lau, said, George, you're trying too hard. Try easier. If you want to solve almost all your problems in the cattle business, graze easier. Graze easier. You can see what happens here. Excellent pasture with 95% ground cover, 3-inch rain in an hour and a half. This study site, 10% runoff. That means out of that 3-inch rain, 2.7 inches went in the ground. Where they had poor pasture with only 50% ground cover, 70% of that rain ran off. That means they only had 9/10 of an inch. Only 9/10 of an inch. The difference between these two scenarios is the amount of grazing they took off that pasture. You say, well, I make money by grazing. I got to eat it. I got to eat it to make money. How much additional pasture will the extra 1.8 inches that got in the soil produce later on? We create our own droughts, folks. Always, always, always leave a protective cover on that pasture. It's really important, not just for reducing the infiltration. We'll look at some other things that's important. This is a study a photo I took out in far western Kansas in 2012. This area had 7 inches of rain that year and 7 inches approximately the year before. 2 driest years probably in history. And in this driest year in history, following the second driest year in history, did they get enough rain here to grow grass? What's that stuff in the ditch? Look at the pasture. This is a close-up of that pasture. What percent defoliation is this? 80, 90? What percent ground cover is there? 20, 30. There's a lot of bare soil there. How much evaporation are you going to have here? How much runoff? When it rains, how much is going in the soil versus what runs off? And from the data I just showed you, you might have 70, 80% runoff on this. That's moisture that doesn't get in the ground. What about evaporation? How much are you going to lose to evaporation here? 100% coverage, 5 inches less evaporation. Are you closer to 100 or closer to 0 on this? And then the other thing that we often don't take into account, so you can see when you get over 50% leaf removal, look at how much root growth you are no longer getting. When you graze too hard, you're removing the ability of the plant to produce roots. When you no longer have roots, you might, even if you have moisture in the soil, you're not going to get it out. This is something I'll echo over and over and over again. Don't overgraze. Don't overgraze. Always, always, always leave a protective covering and a photosynthetically efficient canopy. And we'll hit on this over. Another way of making your farm more moisture efficient is the choice of species that you use. And what I've got a picture of here is an orchard grass pasture. Can you see the orchard grass? You see that brown, all those little brown clumps there? This is in the drought of 2018. The orchard grass basically just dried up and nothing there. And I'm sad to admit that this is one of my pastures. Say, boy, sure could use rain. Take a look at this. This is the same field. I had this field split between a cool season pasture, mostly orchard grass, and a warm season pasture based on eastern gamma grass. Is there a little difference in growth response here? Why is the eastern gamma grass growing just fine and the orchard grass is dried up and brown? Well, one thing is root depth, but it's also because the gamma grass is a warm season grass. Warm season grasses have a different photosynthetic method. It's called C4. And C3 is cool season grasses. We typically have struggles with drought in the summer because even though we get more rain in the summer, we have a lot more wind, a lot more heat, a lot more evaporation, a lot more transpiration. We get more rain in the summer, but we need even more in the summer. And even though we get relatively little rainfall in spring and fall, a lot of times we have more soil moisture in spring and fall because we don't need as much. Lower temperatures, and less direct sunlight. So I would always recommend basing your summer pasture on C4 species. You can see from this table, this is the amount of plant produced per unit of water used. You can see the C4 species are about double what the C3 species do. You get twice as much production per unit of moisture. So always try to base your summer grazing needs on a warm season perennial grass. If you have warm season perennial grasses adapted to your area, and if you're in Kansas, that includes you. So this is a list of what's cool season, warm season grasses. If you're in central Kansas, we're talking, big blue stem, tall grass prairie. If you're in western Kansas, this might be buffalo grass, blue grama, side oats grama. A lot of the pastures in eastern Kansas, if you get east of the Flint Hills and you get north of I-70, it's mostly smooth brome. You get south of I-70, it's mostly fescue. And those species will just dry up and do nothing in a hot, dry summer. So do not rely on those species for your summer productivity. So summarize the moisture aspect here. Maximize your infiltration. Don't overgraze. Maintain your root growth and capture runoff. So another thing I want to explore here is fertility. Now, this is just a picture where they went and got buffalo bones to grind up to use as phosphorus fertilizer. You don't need to take this sort of drastic action. This is something one of my great-great-grandfathers did. But we all know that nitrogen makes grasses grow. You know, this is a nitrogen plot. At the left is 0, the next one is 100, and 200 and 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We all know that nitrogen makes grass grow, and you can see here fertilizer makes grass grow. The problem with fertilizer is you have to pay for it. You got to write a check for it. Is there another way? Well, you can see here that this is where orchard grass and alfalfa plots overlap in a plot. Look at the junction between the two. You see where the alfalfa overlaps the orchard grass? Look at how much healthier and more productive that orchard grass is when it's growing in conjunction with the nitrogen fixing legume. And of course, you know, there are bacteria on the roots of legumes that will fix nitrogen. We've known about that. But why do we not take advantage of this in a pasture situation? And a lot of times it's because say, well, I've got so many weeds I need to spray for them. Well, we'll come back to that later. But you can fix substantial amounts of nitrogen with legumes. You can see here, bottom there, the Bermuda grass plus alfalfa combination is producing almost as much as 400 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's a substantial input, folks. And it's not just legumes that fix nitrogen. There are also free-living nitrogen fixers. This is azospirillum, which lives in the root zone of grasses and can fix nitrogen on grasses. Now, it doesn't form nodules. It lives in the rhizosphere and fixes nitrogen there. Another way of improving the fertility of your pastures is by distributing, retaining the fertility in the manure. Now, if all your manure gets deposited in shade and around the pond, and you can have a big transfer of fertility from your pasture in general, places that a lot of times grow no grass. But if you can distribute your grazing, you also distribute through rotational grazing, you can also distribute the manure deposition. So it's more uniform across the landscape. Manure is a significant source of fertility. Now, it doesn't create any fertility, it simply recycles what's already there. But if you can recycle if you start out with a high level and you recycle it all and recycle it uniformly, then you don't need, if you start out with high fertility, you should stay with high fertility over time. And one means of distributing, problem with manure is it takes fertility from a big area that the animal grazed and deposits in little small areas. But dung beetles can take that manure pie, roll it out, break it up, roll it out, and incorporate it back out across the landscape. And you can see that there are several species. Some live inside the cow pie and some the tumble bugs will roll it away and incorporate it. Another significant source of fertility is hay. If you are making hay and selling it, moving it, you are shipping it off the farm. If you're making hay and feeding it in a dry lot, you are creating a huge amount of fertility to a place that grows nothing beneficial, just weeds. If, however, you take that hay, this is analysis for what's hay and the nutrients in a ton of alfalfa. If you take that hay and you feed it in a manner that's dispersed across the landscape, then you can really enhance the fertility of your ground, particularly if you buy that hay instead of make it yourself off your property. When you buy hay, you're not only buying feed, you're buying fertilizer, but only if you distribute it in a manner where that fertility can benefit you. One way is rolling out bales. We showed, putting bales on a grid and feeding it out. Another is unrolling bales, and then you get this input of fertility there. This to the right, you can see where a bale was unrolled the previous winter. To the left, where the pale colored grass is where that was a strip between where bales were rolled out. Now, a lot of I think we always, when we take a soil test, we assume that is like a gauge on a gas tank. That tells you the total amount out there. It does not tell you the total amount out there. A soil test will a lot of times tell you that in a pasture you've got, 6 to 20, somewhere in there, pounds of phosphorus available per acre. But if you look at the analysis of the rocks, the elemental analysis of rocks, it's real common that in that 3-foot depth of soil in that root zone, you might have 18,000 pounds total of phosphorus out there. That's an insanely large amount. Crop might need, a good, extremely high yielding pasture might use 50 pounds of that in a year. But so why are we putting out fertilizer? Well, obviously it's because we manage in a means in which our crops are not making that available. So what does make it available? One thing that makes it available is mycorrhizal fungi. In native grasses, it's already there, in unplowed native. On some of our pastures in which that were cropped for a period of time, where it was tilled and fallowed, that the mycorrhizal fungi starved out. So we can make a significant impact on our fertility needs by re-inoculating mycorrhizal fungi if it's absent in our soil. And in most long-term cropped areas, it is absent. And the mycorrhizal fungi colonize the plant root, send out hyphae that extract nutrients, bring it back to the host plant. And this is just a close-up. Also on the surface of those mycorrhizal hyphae, which you're seeing the long filaments here, you see all those little specks? Those are bacteria. Those bacteria are capable of, this is closer up yet, this is mycorrhizal fungi boring through rock and extracting minerals. And the bacteria on the surface of those dissolve the rock itself and break it down into minerals, take it back to the plant. This whole process is fed by what you're seeing here is a root tip shooting out root exudates that nourish those bacteria. How do you get more bacteria that break down rock? You feed them. You feed them with this, root exudates. How do you get more root exudates? You have more photosynthesis. How do you get more photosynthesis? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. But this is just my summary. How do you provide fertility without fertilizer? Legumes, free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria, photosynthetically active plant canopy. That's what we're going to talk about next. Importing manure, fertility, create manure, and distribute it across your landscape. So how do you make that pasture more productive? Become a used sunlight salesman. Ted Alexander referred to himself not as a rancher, but as a used sunlight salesman. When you change your mindset, if you think your job as a rancher is to sell beef, you will always struggle. When you see your job as a rancher harvesting sunlight, the world will open up to you. Because you will see, if you think you are selling beef, you say, I sell more beef by eating every bit of grass that's out there. When you are a used sunlight salesman, you see bare ground, you see a photon striking bare soil as a waste of solar energy because it did not strike a leaf, which will not photosynthesize, which will not grow grass, which will not produce beef. You become a used sunlight salesman and everything will change for you. So this is an example. If look at the black line there, that's smooth brome, common grass in northeast Kansas. Look at that, where they left a stubble height after grazing. This was in a rotational graze situation under irrigation, mind you, but where they had a 3-inch stubble height, they produced 6,000 pounds of grass per acre when all they did was move the paddock when the cows ate it down to 6 inches, just a little bit earlier, They doubled their production. How much does it cost to open the gate at 6 inches instead of 3? Not a dang dime. Another thing that you'll notice on a continuously grazed pasture, it's very common. If you are looking at this pasture from the road, you say, hey, things are great. We got all this stubble out there. And look at that tall grass, but you walk out in it and you see half of this grass has never even been touched during the year. Some of it's been grazed right down to the ground because the animals come back to the young, tender regrowth. How do you stop this grazing pattern? That stuff that's grazed 90%, what's its vigor going to be next year? Not much. And so you will continually weaken, and it won't support the same grazing pressure next year. And so you will get an eventual weakening of your pasture and a drop in production. How do you stop this uneven grazing pattern? Well, you do it with rotationally grazing. And rotational grazing, here's an example. This is a pasture in Africa, and you can see this is grazed continuously. And you can see all the overgrazed patches, and you've got these tufts of grass, and those tufts of grass are Aragrostis, a type of love grass that is completely unpalatable. Animals only eat it as a last resort. That's the only thing left out there. And this is across the road. This is how he's grazing. Look at that. This is a fence being moved every 2 hours during the day. This guy is carrying 5 times the number of cattle per acre as the guy across the road. Now, this is grazed very intensely and then gets a very long rest period. And if we had time, I'd go into that. But let me show you the type of pasture that this produces. That is what it looks like. This is after 3 years of that treatment. Very intense grazing, and probably harder than what I would recommend grazing, but followed by a long rest period to restore the vigor of the grass. When you have this pulsed grazing, you can do these sort of things. You can run 5 times as many cattle. I've seen it. It works, folks. Get pastures that look like this as opposed to pastures that look like this. Okay, this is, to most people, is a success right here. This is, very high yielding wheat field on June 21st. What's unusual about June? What's notable about June 21st? It's the summer solstice, longest day of the year. How much photosynthesis is going on here? Zero. This, which most people deem a success, is a colossal failure in agriculture. We are not photosynthesizing on this field. We are wasting a gift of sunlight. We're doing nothing with it, wasting it. Here's another waste. This is seedling soybeans coming up. How much sunlight are we capturing on this field? Virtually none. This is annual agriculture, folks. Now, this is a little better. Now, that corn is drying down. The month of September on a cornfield is a completely wasted month in this area. There is zero photosynthesis going on. It's 80 degrees, we're getting rain, we're getting sun, and we're growing nothing. But on this field, you can see they were aerial seeded about the time the corn was maturing and got the next crop going. We're using that otherwise wasted sunlight to create a source of feed. Not only just using the sunlight, we're using the sunlight with purpose, creating some feed. This is tall grass prairie in the wintertime. How much photosynthesis going on here? Again, none. It's warm season grass in the wintertime. What if we could go, this is Colin Seiss in Australia. He has warm season grasses. He said, what if we drilled in some cool season stuff? Use that sunlight that we're wasting. He found out he could raise pretty good cereal yields on those acres. Not only that, instead of harvesting those cereals with a grain combine, said, why not just pasture them? And we have the same option. The neat thing about it is with all that extra photosynthesis, all those extra root exudates, his soil is on the left. His brother's soil across the fence is on the right. Do you see a difference in that soil? He's improving his soil. At the same time, he's improving his pocketbook by pulling 2 crops off the same area. And this is obviously Australia, very dry area. This is Kansas, but using the same concept. This is yellow blossom sweet clover growing in dormant warm season grasses. Not only photosynthesizing, making extra feed, but also producing nitrogen to benefit the grass. Now, there is a difference. The C3, the C4 grasses, the cool season, the warm season, look at how much more productive a warm season grass is in the summertime. In the summertime, in the heat of summer, try to have a warm season grass capture that sunlight first. We still need the C3, as I'll explain. This is regrowth on a fescue clover field. You see the clumps of Johnson grass, which is a C4 species. Look at how much growth the Johnson grass made compared to the fescue and clover after hay. Several times the growth. During the summer, you want a C4 species grabbing that sunlight, getting first opportunity of that sunlight. Now, that doesn't mean we want only C4 species. The C3 species, look at this. This is April 9th. Fescue, which is cool season, and Bermuda grass, which is warm season. Bermuda grass hasn't started growing. We still need the cool season species as part of our program on the spring and fall. In the winter, when our warm season grasses are dormant, we need both. Now, our cool season grasses do virtually nothing in the summertime. This is brome in September after being hayed off in June. That is 1, 2, 3 months of growth, barely ankle top high, and this is after summer we had 16 inches of rain. 16 inches of rain in those 3 months, and this is all the growth you got. This is where we drilled in some summer annuals. Little difference in productivity there. Drilling those warm season annuals in the cool season perennial base, not only can we still use the cool season, like a cool season in spring and fall, but look at how much summer growth we've accumulated for a monster grazing in the fall. So using more of the sun we receive, here's what we talked about. Don't overgraze, use cover crops on our cropland, cool season annuals and warm season perennials, warm season annuals and cool season perennials. And then I talked about the unnecessary expenses. Number 1, making hay or silage. Quit it. Quit it and your pocketbook will thank you. It's not necessary. Spraying for weeds, not necessary. And we've already talked about the nitrogen fertilizer, ways to eliminate that. So let's talk about hay. How do you get rid of hay? Okay, this is a roughly 1,000-pound cow who weaned off a 920-pound calf. Boy, isn't that impressive? Well, here's the story. I had a May calving herd, and I bought some heifers that were supposed to be open on January 1st. 4 of those heifers gave birth. So I had January calving heifer, 4 head that calved in January. The rest of the herd wasn't going to calve until May. The May calving animals I ran on dry grass during the winter, dormant native grass. These weren't going to survive on that because a lactating cow needs a lot more feed. So I separated them, gave them alfalfa hay. When weaning time came, these calves weighed 94 pounds more than their herd mates, born 4 months later. And at auction, they brought a whopping $16 more per head. $16. Can you buy 4 months of alfalfa hay for a cow for $16? And it dawned on me, calving in January is what most people in Kansas do. That's common, January, February calving. Why do we do that? We put the most critical operation in a livestock herd at a time when the weather is traditionally the worst. And say, what does that impact make? Well, this is cost to keep a lactating cow. And you see, you got to feed a lactating cow high quality feed. Can't rough her by, or she won't rebreed. She won't milk, she won't rebreed. Look at this, $270 a day. So for 4 months, that's $324. That's your expense to deliver the feed, which can be significant if you really accurately track your expenses. Well, let's change that to a dry cow, because she's not going to calve till April or May when things green up. Well, you can feed her low quality hay, it costs half as much, and she doesn't eat as much. So lower intake, cheaper feed, you're at about a third of the expense to winter that cow. Simply changing your calving and your weaning strategies can eliminate much of your winter and feed cost. Another means is utilizing corn stalks. Now, a lot of people graze corn stalks, but hardly anybody actually realizes the true value of corn stalks. Because here's what happens. When you turn cows out on corn stalks, first thing they eat is the grain. They eat the corn. And when they do that, these are pictures of the interior wall of rumens inside that animal. The one in the middle that's black, that looks charcoaled, is from an animal that got acidosis from being transitioned to grain too rapidly. You put cows out on the corn stalks and give them unrestricted access to all the grain they want. This is what happens to every one of them. This is why we don't get the true value from grazing corn stalks. The rumen on the left is from an animal that was on grass, that did not get acidosis. How do you prevent cows on corn stalks from getting acidosis and losing the efficiency of their rumen? Basically, you strip graze. You just use portable fencing, step-in post, poly reels, ration it off a little at a time, 1 day's worth of feed at a time, instead of giving them the whole thing. That way, instead of eating 30 pounds of grain a day or 40 pounds of grain a day, you limit them to about 5 pounds of grain a day and a lot of stalks. So instead of having 1 week of being on full feed and then the rest of the time eating leaves and husks, they can, for 4 months, they can have 5 pounds of grain a day and 25 pounds of leaves and husks. And then, of course, just as we talked about, you can add, through aerial seeding or using a Hagie interseeder, you can add some annual cover crops to those stalks and enhance their value even more. Increase carrying capacity and adding protein. Another means of cheaply wintering cattle, this is stockpiled fescue. Fescue is fantastic. It's a horrible summer grass. Don't graze fescue in the summer. Leave it for the winter when it's good. Of course, the reason most people don't use fescue in the winter is because it's already grazed up by the time winter arrives. There's none left. So what you can do is, now this is another means of wintering cattle. This is stockpiled sorghum planted on cropland. This is a non-heading sorghum used for wintering cattle. Plant it, let it grow, don't bale it. Don't put it up for silage, just let it stand and graze it in the wintertime. This is a male sterile sorghum, produces no grain, just forage. And this is dormant native grass, which I think is one of the most underutilized feed sources that we have. Why do we not use it in the wintertime? Because we grazed it all in the summertime. We overgrazed it, there's none left. So if we do like we're supposed to, take half and leave half, if you can use the half you leave for winter forage, because that half you leave in the winter is used to replace hay, it might be more valuable than the half you grazed in the summer. Might be worth more money. It's not wasted, it's still there. But if you're calving in the dead of winter, this is not nutritious enough for a lactating cow, but it might be plenty good for a dry cow. And you say, well, I don't have any fescue left. I don't have any native grass left. I grazed it all in the summer because I had nothing else to eat. If that's the case, year after year, give them something else to eat, like this. This is a summer annual mix planted on cropland, grazed in July, August, September. This can take pressure off your perennial grasses, allow them to accumulate growth for grazing in the fall and winter instead of feeding hay. It's cheaper to plant this and graze it in the summer, stockpile your perennials, and then graze them later. Not only is it better on your perennials, helps your water cycle, helps your sunlight photosynthesis, your root depth, all those things. Gives you a feed source in the winter other than hay. This is far cheaper than baling up hay and feeding it. So if you want to eliminate the need for hay, extend your grazing season with all these ideas and move your calving to the start of the growing season. And then the last unnecessary expense is weed control. You look at the all those things sticking up on the right, those are things we call weeds. Say, man, that guy needs to go out and get some graze on and spray that. Get rid of those weeds. Well, this is where we pulled up the polywire on this pasture down in Texas. To the right, do you see any plants in that pasture that were not eaten? Do you see any plants out there that were not eating? If you use daily movement rotational grazing, you will find that cows eat almost every plant out there. I'm not exaggerating. Say, well, they won't eat my weeds. I've got thistles. Really? What's this calf eating? Under daily movement rotational grazing, you will find that cattle eat almost every single plant out there. This is Doug Peterson, Missouri. Do you recognize the plant those animals strip there? It's ironweed. You look at continuous graze pasture, they're covered with ironweed and nothing's touched them. But under daily movement grazing, 120,000 pound stock density, it's eaten. Now think about it. Well, they didn't kill it. So if they eat it, why are you worried? If they eat every plant out there, no plant out there is a problem, right? Why spend money to eliminate something they eat? Just change your management so that they eat everything. Simple.
Dale, I'll give you about 3 minutes here.
Okay. And if there are still some plants out there that are not used, you can use a weed wiper and eliminate those. You can eliminate the Sericea lespedeza much cheaper than broadcast spraying by using a weed wiper. Graze a paddock, and after you're done, wipe it. So all of these things together are designed to eliminate your expenses, increase your production, and simultaneously reduce your expenses. So rather than worry, you can be happy. And like Noah said, I do have a couple books on the market. If you're interested in these books and getting more into depth in some of the things we talked about, send me an email and I can have a book sent to you, or both books sent to you, better yet. And so I'm wrapped up now. So where are we at, Noah? I know I probably went over time here, but I always do.
Yep. That's okay. That was great. I didn't want to cut you off early or anything, so
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
I enjoyed being able to finish. So.
There you go. Well, I will probably conclude, but like I said, if there are questions that you guys had, definitely send those to Dale, or you can even send me an email as well when you sign up. But one of the reasons I even thought about cutting you off, Dale, was just to leave a little teaser for next week, because next week you're going to be talking about maximizing your grazing profit on brome and fescue. So you kind of alluded to that tonight. If that's something that you guys are interested in, you can go and sign up for that as well. Like I said, we're going to be doing this for a couple weeks. So Dale will have plenty more information to share. If you appreciated that, go ahead and share this with your friends. We'll try to get this uploaded to the YouTube page here over the weekend or first part of next week. And with that, we'll probably conclude. Dale, you have any final thoughts?
Well, I would say that if you are in an area or your farm does not have brome or fescue or other cool season grasses, doesn't mean that you could not benefit from having those grasses in your operation. In fact, I think a lot of people who are warm season grass based benefit tremendously from having some cool season perennial grasses. And with some of the newer varieties that are on the market now, the ability to grow fescue and other cool season grasses is rapidly moving into hotter, drier areas. Said just because you don't have them now, don't rule out not ever having
I think my takeaway here tonight is if you've got 2 inches of rain, you have no excuse.
them.
No excuse.
It is amazing what they were able to do just by stopping the runoff.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I appreciate your time,
Thank
Dale.
you, everybody.
We'll see you all next week at 7 o'clock. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.